Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. The time is 6 o'clock, and we have the presence of a quorum, and this meeting has been called, and notice of the meeting has been given in the time and manner required by law, so we're ready to go ahead and get started. We have no information items tonight. This is a big shock to us all, Dr. Dupree. So we'll move on immediately into the review items. And our first review item are the board policies. And we're doing the D series of board policies, and there's the list up there. So do we have any questions? I guess we'll just go down the list and see if we have any questions in order. Do we have any questions on DFE?
Hang on, let me look. I documented some of these things for me.
All right, so let's everybody get caught up. It's page 7 of your board book.
Yeah, actually, we were just talking about this.
All right, Mr. Rosenthal.
Obviously, we're strengthening this a little bit by that paragraph about resignation. I'm surprised that wasn't actually in there before. I don't know. I actually wouldn't mind strengthening this a little bit to make sure that, in the past we've had people, I'm not going to bring up any examples, but we've had people that resigned and everything kind of, went away. And they most likely moved on to another district and probably pulled the same stunts. And so I don't know. I'm just throwing this out. I don't know how we could strengthen it legally. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there just for discussion purposes.
So sometimes there is the perception that people do leave us and there's nothing done, but in actuality, we have a practice of not only reporting those items that need to be, the conduct that needs to be reported to SBEC, but often we report conduct that in an abundance of caution, where perhaps it's not it has not risen to the level that the law requires reporting, but we will report conduct that probably causes you concern and causes us concern, of course. So sometimes, again, it may seem like nothing's happening, but we've alerted SBEC. And so from that,
I'm sorry, who is
Could you
that?
tell us what SBEC is?
So that is TEA's certification department now. They used to be their own standing, the State Board of Educator certification. Now they're under TEA, and they have a section of investigators that receive the reports. They come under Dr. Dupree's name. They're done within 7 days of an incident that either causes us concern with regard to conduct toward a student or conduct that rises to the level requiring reporting under the law. And then from those letters, we typically get an open records request or a request for documents from TEA investigators. Sometimes it happens pretty quickly, sometimes it may be months later, but TEA does some sort of investigation, and we collaborate in the sense of whatever they need from us and whatever we're able to provide to them, we do.
And what were the initials? You said it was TEA?
SBEC, the State Board of Educator certification.
SBEC.
SBEC.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I didn't realize that's what you were, yeah.
Sorry. So it's so in my vernacular, I apologize.
Okay.
So does that help, Mr. Rosenthal?
Well, so if I guess if somebody leaves here and they go on to, apply at some other district, does that other district even bother to check, or?
I mean, we do often.
Or can they, or can we? I mean, if let's say it's a case where somebody resigns from another school district and they want to come here and work, is that typically something that we would even look into, or?
Sure, and we often, what we do is we look at the application, the hiring staff.
It might be good, Cynthia, to point out when we hire certified staff, we always get their certification from SBEC. And so when these things are reported, it's noted on their certification.
If they're conducting an investigation, Dr. Dupree is correct, that will be noted on the actual certification, and that causes up, of course, a flag. That definitely is a reason why we would move on to another candidate. And then we get criminal background checks from
Right.
SBEC. And then we also, in the hiring process, those that are hiring will call those supervisors, and that's why we have requirements about checking references.
Okay. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that. I know it's come up where,
Well, I
situations
think
have
it's,
arisen.
I agree with what you're saying, but I think it's good if we're taking care of our business in
Right.
terms of reporting it, so we're protecting other districts. And we are, in our policy, saying these folks are not eligible for reemployment, so that, I think we're doing everything we can to protect ourselves. I'm not sure how we could strengthen
Yeah.
it to protect ourselves
Okay.
any better. Mr. Rice?
Well, I was just going to ask if someone were to resign under those circumstances and another district in which they were considering employment called here to inquire, if they asked the question, are they eligible to be rehired? And the answer is no. I mean, can we say that?
I do believe that is something that we share.
All right, so
Because
then that
the
would be-
employee is typically given notice when when they give their resignation. First of all, we're required to let them know that we will report them to SBEC, but also when we are in investigations that might not rise to the level that require the reporting, we will inform the employee before they resign that they will not be eligible for rehire.
So would that go a ways towards? Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, we want to protect all the kids in the state, so if, somebody does something that they're, I'm not talking about something simple or minor, but, major stuff. You don't want them.
And what we might consider major, that would be those things that we would, even if they don't rise to the level legally require reporting, we would, in an
Right.
abundance of caution, report those to the proper authorities.
Okay, good, thank you.
All
Yes,
right.
sir.
Great, thank you very much. So I think we're good on that one. So next is DFFB. Do we have any questions on this one?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenthal?
I don't know, maybe I just read it wrong, but if you look on page 9, the criteria for decision, that first sentence,
Okay, well, this one only has 4 pages, so.
oh, I'm reading the actual policy where,
Oh, it's page 2 of 4. He's looking at the board book, page number 9.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
I'm sorry, yeah.
That's right.
So where it says criteria for discussion, it says the superintendent or designee, da-da-da-da-da, within an affected employment area, when a program change will not result in the renewal. Is it
In the-
supposed to mean will result in the non-renewal? Or is it not? It was confusing to me.
When it doesn't result in the non-renewal of all staff.
Okay.
Okay, so
'Cause I-
sometimes we have them where all of the staff are then either terminated or for purposes of this policy.
So this is just a specific group or something, that's why the word not is there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Like I said, I read it a little differently and I
I
read
guess
through
the
that. and said,
emphasis would be in all staff.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. That did not come through to me. I don't know if anybody else, read it that way or not, but I think that's it for that one. That's all the comments I had.
And this is the one that has to do with, these are contract, Chapter 21 contracts, right? This is the category that we're talking about when we're talking about this particular policy.
And in particular, those employees that are on a Chapter 21 term contract,
Okay,
so not a probationary contract.
okay. So that's another reference point on that, too. All right, anything else? All right, let's go on to DGBA. This has to do with the complaints and grievances, And I had a question on this one, because on page 7 of this policy, which is, I don't know what page of the whole thing, in the very last paragraph there, it talks about, it says the employee and the administration, it talks about the way that these things come to us if we're receiving a hearing officer's recommendation. And I felt like we maybe needed to develop that process a little bit better or clarify it, because it seemed very confusing. I thought a person reading this might be confused by it.
In particular, the paragraph regarding board's review?
Yes.
Okay. So currently, the practice is, once we receive the hearing officer's recommendation, that is provided to the board with the complete record for the grievance. At the same time, we provide notice to the grievant and their representative, if they're represented, that the hearing officer's recommendation, he typically sends that directly to them. And we send another notice that indicates when the board will deliberate that recommendation, will consider that recommendation. And we also provide a deadline for a written response, which is provided to the board as well prior to the meeting. And the grievant or the representative have an opportunity to speak during public comment regarding their grievance.
Yeah, and we've had that happen, and then it becomes kind of awkward because they have trouble, and if it's about a student or an employee, then it's sort of an awkward time. Maybe that's still the best way to handle it, I don't know, but.
Well, I think you've raised a good question, because it does say that the complainant can respond in orally or in writing at the board's election. So would we want to define either here or in a procedure? Because that's where I hear your question being around, so we get rid of that gray area. Does the board want to clearly define how and when that will take place? Would it be an agenda item? How would we do it? Because currently, I think they can access the microphone for 3 minutes during audience items, but does the board want to expand this somehow to make it more clear?
I think so I think it should be noted that what we mean by orally addressing the board is during the public audience time. But then I think we should maybe, just as a courtesy to the public who wants to address us about their grievance, the restrictions that involves. So, do you understand what I'm saying? Because they can't really name the student, they can't talk about the employees, and it makes it hard to follow what they're trying to say, and then, whoever's the president has to interrupt them and halt their speech and all that. So it doesn't seem very fair to them if that's how they've come to speak to the board and they expect them to be able to state their case, but.
So we need to communicate guidelines.
Thank you, Dave. We need to communicate the guidelines. So I don't know if that should be in here or if that can be in the letter that goes to them or the notice that you said you already send. Because I don't think the board minds hearing from them during public comment. We never want to stop someone from saying something during public comment.
I
and
think
we're
it's
all-
helpful, actually.
Yeah,
It has
and we're
been in the
always
past.
happy to
Yeah.
take things in writing, so.
They receive the deadline with regard to the written communication, the written response, and then they're actually given the link to the public comment page on the website where they will include the information. Depending on the situation, we have specified that they cannot comment with regard to employee names or student names. It has not been an issue in the past, but I understand the need for
Well,
clarification.
that's because we first say to them, okay, now you can't say, and then, then they've, looking at their written notes thinking, well, what can I say? So it just seems to me to come across as kind of awkward.
If we're talking about providing clarification, that could easily be done in the notice letter that we provide them. If we're talking about what the board's election is, to this point, we've not had an action on that. So we've always given both options to the grievance and their representatives.
And Madam Board President, can I offer some thoughts about that issue? One thing to consider is if you allow an oral presentation and you allow that oral presentation of a grievance to be made as part of the public comment portion of your board meeting, is that you're in somewhat of an adversary proceeding between the administration and the grievant. Yet the grievant would have the ability to make that presentation during public comment, but there's no opportunity for the administration to respond. So it has been a little bit awkward because the board has never expressly made any election as to its preference. But if you had an oral hearing of a grievance, oftentimes what boards do is separate and apart from the public comment, they actually set a date and time for both sides, the administration and the grievant, to make a presentation. If you would require that it be in writing, then the board members get the benefit of seeing a written submission from both sides. It doesn't have the benefit of oral presentation, but you get to see thoughtful arguments presented by both sides. I think the administration would tell you they'd welcome a selection of one or the other, so that when we get to the point of a board meeting, we don't have any confusion about what the board's will is as to whether it prefers one or another, because it stands currently. We've never had the board express that wish up front. We're usually trying to meet what we think the board's wishes are on the back end.
All right, well, thank you for sharing that. So I guess the thing that the initial option that you suggested then is, I don't think is desirable, because then we might as well hear the whole thing in the first place. So I don't know that that's necessarily a good path forward. I do think it is fair for the grievant to be able to speak to the board in public comment. I don't think we ever want to stop a member of the community from speaking to the board. But I do think there have to be the clear guidelines so that they know what to expect. And I don't know what the rest of you think.
Let me add.
And then I would like, and then thirdly, I think any amount of written, any amount of writing, well, within reason, we are willing to accept and read and consider. So if we receive that from the grievant ahead of time, we read it, but we have to get that in the right amount of time. And sometimes if we don't have it the week before something and we're just being delivered it that night, that's not desirable, because we can't really read it. There's no window of time where we can stop and read it.
So my suggestion is some boards limit the presentation to be solely limited to writing. And you could revise this policy to eliminate the reference to oral, meaning that as part of this appeal process to the board, the submissions have to be in writing, but make it clear that that doesn't preclude somebody who wants to speak in public comment that they can. It's just that they should not have any expectation that as part of their utilization of the 3 minutes that the administration will respond in kind, or that the board can ask any questions during their presentation and public comment. But that would remove confusion, because the confusion that's caused by this reference to orally or in writing is that representatives and lawyers have the expectation that if you're going to grant oral presentation, that it's something more than just speaking in public comment. They're expecting a form of appellate argument where both sides get to present their case. And being respectful to your time, I just think historically you've not been willing to do that for every grievance that you receive.
And that's a good point. I do think that we should allow people to come speak, okay? But again, that comes under, setting the guidelines, I think we need to clarify this some more.
We can change it to say public during.
Yes, that we're not going to respond.
They may participate in public comment.
Because we do get to hear the administration's side. We get those grievances, and you're right. I mean, sometimes they're 400 or 500 pages, you know, and there have been occasions where I have read the whole thing. But, you know, usually we look at the summary but I don't mind listening to somebody, you know, state their case, but as long as there's that understanding that, you know, it's not a dialogue, and, you know, odds are we're not going to respond, even though technically I guess it's on the agenda. I think it's pretty balanced. I think we get to hear, you know, from the actual grievance that we read, you know, so it's.
Mr. Verdeen has a comment.
In my opinion, I think that we just have a disclaimer that just says, look, your whole story may not be able to be told if you choose to hear it in person, but that may be the method that may be able to communicate better, but that's their deal. So as long as we disclaim that, then I think it keeps it simple.
That they're limited to the 3 minutes and that the board will not be responding or asking
Right.
questions. It's not an interactive time. So does that seem, Mrs. Rincon, does that seem like we could fix that writing in there to convey that?
Would you like it in the policy or in the notice letter that we provide to the grievant? Because that is, what you're describing is what is actually, I believe, in your board operating procedures with regard to public comment.
Right, but we need to clarify this, that this is not an oral argument about the grievance. This is an invitation to speak at public comment, but there will not be response from the board during that time. But
Definitely.
they have
Yeah.
the option to do both things, to speak as an audience, as a member of the community during the public comment section, and they have the opportunity to give written materials to the board.
We can clarify this here.
And how
There-
far ahead do the written materials come?
We typically require, if the board receives everything on Thursday, that, similar to that time when you would receive the record from us.
Okay, so the grievant knows that they need to have their materials to the district by the Thursday before the Monday meeting.
Yes, ma'am, when we get the hearing officer's recommendation, a notice typically goes out within the couple of days to share with them a deadline. We try to give at least a week for the board to have that as well.
All right, Mr. Verdeen.
I was going to say, in my opinion, it needs to be in policy and it needs to go out to the individual.
Because.
If it's not in policy, it doesn't exist.
I think that that's advisable, and my recommendation would be that you take this existing policy and simply remove the words either orally or, and then add a sentence that says that nothing in this policy prohibits the grievant from presenting, and then make cross-reference to your BED local. And I think that preserves exactly what you want to do. And then they will be subject to all the guidelines that accompany that other policy for public comment, including the inability to make mention of other employees' names or student names.
And that the board is not going to respond to that comment. So that's the other thing, because technically this is an item that is on the agenda, but the board is not going to, the board will listen during the public comment session, but they're not going to respond.
Yes, and so by that cross-reference, it'll also pick up that same prohibition under BED local.
Okay. All right, anything else on this one? All right, next is DH, which is on page 20.
I'm shocked why we would even have to consider this one at this time, huh?
Uh-huh.
I did have something here. Mr. Morris, you might need to chime in on this as well as Ms. Rincon. Under electronic recording, where it says, no employee shall electronically record by audio, video, or other means any conversations or meetings unless each and every person present has been notified of being electronically recorded. In Texas law, isn't it only one person in that room has to know that there's a recording? So it seems to me that, again, you're the lawyer, I'm not, okay? But that's the way I've always heard it, so it seems to me that maybe this is not
So the way that we view this is not that it's an illegal action, but it is an action against board policy.
Okay.
And I would agree with that. So you're correct. That's a correct statement for purposes of criminal prosecution. But there's law out there that supports the proposition that employers don't have to allow their administrators or other managers to be secretly recorded. And I think it's an important policy because it makes the playing field equal for everybody.
Sure.
We wouldn't have administrators or supervisors secretly recording employees when they have discussions with them. And so it's a matter of reciprocal respect in the work environment that if there's going to be recording, that's fine, but it shouldn't be surreptitious, because you can imagine if somebody is trying to orchestrate statements to be made, they can, through prompting,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
manipulate a conversation.
No, I just wanted to make sure that that we weren't running afoul of law or anything like that. So, no, I don't disagree that, everybody should be notified, especially in an environment like education. So, yeah.
All right. I had one other comment on this, actually, this particular page, since we're on here, in the section that says use with students. And this is talking about using electronic media to communicate with currently enrolled students. That's right in the middle of that sentence. And the next sentence says, all other employees are prohibited from using electronic media to communicate directly with students. So I was a little concerned about that because I thought there might be some exceptions where a coach would be authorized to communicate with the students, but then the coach is absent, or there's a change of plans or something like that, or there's another teacher that's chaperoning an event or something, and they might need to, they probably do on this, in this day, use electronic media to text or whatever, communicate with the students. So I don't know how we should change that, but somehow, if they're prohibited if it's outside the scope of their professional responsibilities or something, some kind of language like that seemed appropriate. Mrs. Rincon, do you have a?
Well, I might offer that if someone has to take the place of informing the students, for example, the coach that's absent and you want to let them know that the practice is canceled, then that person actually takes on the same permission as the coach who was communicating with the students.
Mm-hmm.
Because now that becomes their responsibility, and so it is within the scope of their responsibilities to communicate with the students.
Okay.
I
Well,
think-
that might have been too specific of an example. I just was thinking there were maybe some scenarios where, I understand we don't want people randomly texting students, but we also don't want to make it too tight that people can't do their responsibilities, so I'm not.
So in my review of the policy, what it intends to do is it places an administrative burden on the superintendent or a campus principal to designate employees who are permitted to have electronic communications. And I think the goal is that outside that universe, those other employees who have not been so designated, the expectation is that they should never have electronic communications with students. So the devil is somewhat in the detail of the implementation, who's been appropriately designated to be able to have these electronic communications. I don't know what the administrative vehicle for that is, but I would expect that teachers, coaches would all fall within the administrative designation.
Yeah, it says in accordance with the administrative regulations, and I don't know that we have the regulations.
I don't
So we
believe that
don't
they're,
know what the definition is.
I
so.
don't believe that they were in your book.
Well, maybe, would it be possible then to kind of look into that in the next couple of days and then see if you all feel like it's covered?
Sure.
Either in the regulations in some systematic way, or if we should change the language here. Does
Yes, ma'am.
anybody else have any comment, Mr. Rosenthal?
I don't know, I mean, to me, it seems fairly clear where it says employee, within the scope of the employee's professional responsibilities, that any communication, is allowed.
But it says they have to be designated in writing by the superintendent or a
Okay.
campus
Yeah, I see.
principal.
Right.
So I can see how that would get problematic. when
If
you-
there's no paper trail somewhere, then.
Right, or there's an
somebody that
assistant coach, or there's a
You're right, right.
chaperone that goes on the student council trip, but it's not the normal sponsor or
Yeah.
addition to the original sponsor or something.
You can see where somebody could get in trouble based on some technicality, when there was no intent and it was in a professional capacity.
Right.
Um,
Or in the reverse, someone could be recused from being in trouble because we didn't handle it that way in that other case, so why am I in trouble? You did the same thing. You didn't have the paper trail for the other
Okay,
person.
yeah, I see yeah.
We can definitely look at this paragraph a little bit more.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have anything else on DH local?
I had something here, let me find it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Under exceptions, I found this kind of strange, but because I'm trying to think of examples. It says it shall not be considered a violation of this policy if the employee manufactures, possesses, or dispenses a substance listed above as part of the employee's job responsibilities. And I'm just really trying to think of an example, so
The school nurse.
they're manufacturing.
Well, he or she wouldn't manufacture, but they would dispense.
Possession of aerosol paint, perhaps? If maintenance had
Okay.
aerosol paint?
Okay.
Zest,
I guess maybe if a science teacher's showing, kids something with alcohol or something, and he ferments, has something, brewing, and, okay.
fermentation, or even producing an alcohol in the organic
Yeah.
chemistry lab.
Okay. Yeah, I guess when I see the word manufacture, I'm thinking meth. I was like, wait a second. I hope we're not doing that in the classrooms.
Definitely not the exception we were thinking.
Yeah, well, that's why I said I'm trying to think of examples, and okay. Thank you for that, not being one of them. Okay.
All right, any more? Go ahead.
I did have one comment with regard to alcohol and drugs. The paragraph on that same page, just a few paragraphs above where Mr. Rosenthal was focusing. We are recommending one more change that was discussed just recently. An employee shall not manufacture, distribute, dispense, possess, use, or be under the influence of any of the following substances during work days. Because work hours may vary during a work day. You could still be doing your work late in the evening, and it's not meant to be an instructional day. Because if you're working an activity in the evening, you could be working in your classroom, you would still be held responsible to this policy. So we had wanted to consider work days.
So
Go ahead, Ms. Heller.
help me understand, because work hours is just that. If I'm on the clock and I'm getting paid for something, then I know that, for example, I'm here tonight, I don't get paid. No one, make sure I say that. If I'm here from 6 to 10 o'clock, that's my work hours. My work day starts 12 o'clock to 12 o'clock that day. If I decided I want to have a glass of wine after this, my work hours right now, am I now in violation of my
Well,
conduct?
the concern would be, for example, teachers are required to have a duty-free lunch, 30-minute duty-free lunch. And so there's an argument there of, is that your work hour or not, given that you have this 30-minute duty-free lunch? And so we would not want anyone to consider this 30-minute a time where they could go off campus, have a drink, come back to their work hours. Also, after school, maybe the parent conference in the afternoon, if something's happening in the evening, like parent-teacher conferences or open house, We would not want someone to go have a drink after hours and then come back to the school under the influence of alcohol. So those are the scenarios that we were thinking of, contemplating, and in an effort to clarify for employees more than anything.
Is this the type of thing that's spelled out in a little more detail in the regulations?
I don't believe that it is, but perhaps that is somewhere that we could consider.
I think it needs a little bit more clarity than just saying work day, because a work day is Monday through Friday. That's my work days. My work hours, my core work hours, to my HR person over there, Kermit, is from 8, to 5. And I know in my employment that during that my core hours, that during my lunchtime I don't go and have alcohol. And I understand the example that you were using because you've got parent-teacher conferences after work, those kinds of things. But I think that's part of the hours, core hours, extended hour for that particular day, right? For that particular day, because it's not something that happens every day. So if I'm having parent-teacher conference or I have something going on at 7 o'clock, my work hours now have been extended. But after that parent-teacher conference, if I decide that I want to go and indulge in a glass of wine, I should not be able to. My concern is that this can be abused, because, I just saw you, Miss such and such, you're a teacher, you're having a glass of wine at TGIF, and it's after her work hours, where she's completed her work day, for her core work hours for that particular day. So I'm concerned with putting something like that inside there. If you can provide me some more clarity on that and some wording on that, we can discuss further.
There was quite a bit of debate on this one, and we didn't really discuss after the work hours. But let's say you have teacher PD, no kids are around, and normally during those times you have extended lunch. That lunch can be anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. 5 or 6 employees decide to go off to have lunch. Because there's no kids around, they go ahead and have a few drinks, come back to work and finish their PD for the rest of that day. Now, this hour and a half is really not their work hours. This is their duty-free lunch.
So what I'm hearing then is help me with the terminology, especially Dave. Dave likes good terminology. It's a break in the work day, right? It's a break in the work hours or whatnot. It's a concurrent work schedule kind of hours thing where, you're on, then you're off, and you're on again, right? So whenever you have that, I don't know what you call that,
Mm-hmm.
but that's what we're really talking about. If we know that you're going to be on again in that particular weekday or day, right? Then from the time you're on to your last work hour that's scheduled for the day, then you can't have alcohol. That's what we're really saying. We're not saying.
And that's what the policy says, because it says you can't be under the influence during work hours,
Right.
or working hours.
So-
Right, that's what it says right now.
But I think what she's saying is that because of that gap, what I hear Kermit saying is that we might have some people who, because of that break, it's a technical thing, they want to go out and partake, right? But I think what we're saying is that anytime that there's work hours start one time and then whatever their scheduled last work hour for that day, between those hours, they are not to consume alcohol or anything else. It's an hour thing. Because if you write that the way it sounds, if I'm feeling myself that particular day, and I see a teacher out, Mr. Spears, you're not supposed. The policy says you're not supposed to be drinking alcohol, right? That day, but you've done your job. Your duty for the day was ended at 6 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like people can. I'm sorry for the dramatics, but
Don't get me in trouble with Mrs. Spears.
I want to make sure y'all understand what I'm saying.
No.
But it's more of
I
a
think we got-
concurrent hours within that particular day.
I really think, Eddie, this addresses what you're saying. I think it's because it says, and Grail mentioned this, under the influence. So that implies if I'm going to go to lunch, if I have a couple of drinks at lunch, I'm under the influence. And it says you don't have to be legally intoxicated. I'm coming back with alcohol in my system. So, and then it talks about while at school or at school-related activities during or outside of usual working hours. So I personally, I think this addresses our goal.
I think Eddie's concern
The word hours.
was that if you
don't-
took the word
days,
hours out
changing
and
it to
swapped
days.
with days,
The word
and
hours.
that's,
Mine says working
That's it.
hours.
right, and I think, I tend to agree. I think this kind of covers it all, just the way it is, without changing
Maybe
it.
if you feel like there's more clarification, if you guys do, you can put it in the regulations, and then it's there.
Thank you.
All right, anything else in DH? DHE. This is pretty straightforward. Anything else in that one? Any questions on that one? All right, we're on DIA. Any questions on this one?
I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When looking at some of the other policies in other districts, one of the things that they put in there, this might be a little controversial, but I want to put it out there, especially since we've had a lot of things in the news about this. But what about our transgender, those types of discrimination policies? We're not addressing that here at all.
It's on the discrimination section. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. I'm looking around for the right page.
Maybe I missed it, I didn't see it.
It's on the first page, I think. I found it now. I've got page 1 of 5. I think we're in the wrong policy. There you go. There you go, there you go, there you go.
So it says color, religion, gender, national origin, age, disability, and any other basis prohibited by law.
I think you got it covered.
Okay, gender, okay.
And there's also some examples down below.
Okay.
I think it's already covered.
Okay? Anything else on this one? DJ, employee recognition and awards. Okay, I think that's broadening that up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that. I will say that. You know,
Yeah.
I didn't have any specific issues with it, but I'm happy to see that we're putting an emphasis on that. I think it's important.
Can I use this time to say, we really enjoyed the event that was held last week to acknowledge those who have provided service to our district. So
Yeah.
really enjoyed that.
10-year and 15-year,
Mhm.
and we're coming up to the 20-plus year group will be honored in a couple of weeks, I think. So that's, you're right, that's nice. Next is DK. DK local, there was just a small change in that one, and a reference added. On page 2, there we go. Have any questions on that? All right, moving on to DP. Do we have any questions on this one? I had a thought at the bottom of there, the last thing, it says other qualifications deemed necessary by the superintendent. I wonder if we should make reference to our leadership competencies there. Not that we necessarily need to put them in policy, but they could then become part of the regulations or something like that. You
More
look con-
specifically, Grill, what were you thinking?
Well, I was just saying, if we changed the language,
Well, we actually discussed that, but we determined since this is board policy,
Mm-hmm.
we thought it best to reference only policy. That's why we referenced core beliefs and commitments that the board actually approves, since the leadership competencies are more management oriented. We didn't know if that'd be appropriate to include that in policy.
okay.
So I think it is generically covered, because that is something we attempt to hire for. But we didn't know if you'd want to specifically spell out,
I just was considering using the phrase leadership competencies. I don't think we need to spell them out, and then we put the leadership competency document in the regulations, and then management can change it as they deem necessary. But I think it's kind of nice to have it there, because then it holds the principals accountable for strengthening their skills around the leadership competencies that management's identified as being critical to the organization. I think it's just in knowing the history of the organization, sometimes we lose things along the way, and if it's referenced by name, someone might read this policy 10 years from now and say, hey, what are those leadership competencies? And they might look them up and say, hey, we better revise this. This is a good idea. Let's update this. So that was my only feeling. I don't necessarily think we need to list them exactly, but just the concept to be added to that phrase so that it's there generically. Mr. Burdine.
I like that idea. So you would just say, other qualifications deemed necessary by the leadership competencies, just like that.
Well, I think we could have leadership, how about leadership competencies and other qualifications as deemed necessary by the superintendent? Because I think the superintendent still needs to have authority over, if he has a certain qualifications in mind for hiring a principal. For example, the EDGE principals we're trying to hire, there's certain additional qualifications that we're looking for, right?
Yes.
I like that idea.
Good.
I have one other comment.
Yes, sir.
And I'm just going to, again, throw this out there, maybe generate discussion, maybe not. Don't know how we would include this, but Dr. Dupree, you and Christy and I had a discussion about this one time about how do I want to say this? School politics, and I'm not talking about school board politics. I'm talking about politics that goes on inside of any organization, inside of any building, any group, whether it be schools, private enterprise, whatever. And I think sometimes that teachers get caught up in that, and especially effective teachers, because they're really focused on doing what's best for kids, and they end up leaving. And so, again, I don't know how to put something in here, but I would like to see every principal at every school, before they do make any decisions or allow any other decisions to be made, to ask themselves the question, is this best for my kids? And again, I don't know how you put that in a policy other than to write that down and say, a principal shall ask themselves that question, before any decisions are made. Because it happens. I mean, you're never going to get rid of it. I understand that. I mean, it's part of life. But that's just something that's always, because I've observed this, and it's at every school. There's no one school that it's not at.
Yeah,
But it's bothersome.
I hear you, Dave, and I agree with you. I wonder if the better place for that is in the instructional management policy we have about and it references in there instructional leadership. And we talked about, that was in our E's, no, it's in E's?
Yeah, the
It's in-
curriculum stuff, yeah, that was
Yeah.
all in.
And it talks about that, and one of the things I was suggesting to add was about, a statement about the principal's responsible for the culture on their campus, but I think this comes in the same, maybe in the same, arena that, so that might, this is more, I think, about, I kind of read this more about hiring, but management of
Yeah, I
the instructional setting is maybe where what you're talking about comes.
Well, actually, I like the way you frame that and asking themselves the question. But if you look at the primary role as defined, talks about board's core beliefs and commitments.
It does, but,
Primary role to ensure an effective instructional program for all students.
I mean,
So it's kind of, I think it's
it
enforcing
is,
that.
it's in there, but it's, I want people to really think about that,
Mhm.
specifically. Okay, how is this going to affect?
But you're
Right.
talking about wanting it to infect the learning environment. So this is about the personnel and the qualifications of the personnel, not about decision-making in the learning environment. So I think if that type of thing seems like we want to include it in policy, I think it's in a description of the instructional environment.
I can see
I
that.
think that's where it fits better.
That's fine.
In the managed curriculum policy that the board worked on, there
Right.
is principals' responsibilities, and that is something that, it's one of the policies that we're reviewing for further consideration. So it's definitely something that we can bring to the board. And this is also a good time for me to remind you that you will be receiving what we think is the final policies in the E-Series at this point. On the 18th, you'll be receiving a binder, and then we'll be moving forward for action in May. Then we'll come back in May and give you a binder for the remainder of the D policies for action possibly in June. But we have been working quite a bit, looking at the E policies for further consideration that were provided to you. And that is one of the policies where we could add something like what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, I just think maybe that needs to be considered somewhere, just.
Well, I think maybe we can check to see if it fits there, and if when we talk about that one, if it doesn't fit, then we can always come back and update this one again. If it seems to fit better here.
Yeah, again, it's implied, but I think it needs to be explicit.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, this is something so important you mentioned, and I totally agree with what you said. And thank you for bringing that up, and I'm on board with some kind of, language putting out there. So when you're making that decision, this is the best, like I'm just repeating, this is in the best interest of our children. And thank you for bringing that up. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. George. Do we have any other comments? Okay, so I have a question just overall, Mrs. Rincon. We did this chunk of these policies, and you can update these and incorporate the thoughts we've had tonight for next week. And then we have another section of section of D policies, but you said our next chunk is going to be another group of E's.
Yes, because we still had those E's for further consideration and some that were on hold.
Right, and then we have another chunk of D's coming in June, say.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
At that
So-
time, what we anticipate, if you recall in your binder, you have a chart, and the chart has a second section of policies that we are recommending revisions or additions. And then we have a few policies that are on hold. There are 4. If at this time, we don't believe that we have the information we need, but if we are able to provide those in the the 18th, we'll do that. And then any of those for further consideration, any comments that you may have, if you will share those with us, to date, we have received a few, and so we'll incorporate those in the ones that are for further consideration.
Okay, so in the chart, it shows the list that's to be determined. Though, that group, you guys are still researching, or you're deciding if we need to make changes or not, or you're waiting for us to say, in your minds, they don't need changes, and you're waiting for us to suggest changes?
So from our initial review, we do not believe that that these require changes. However, we are waiting for the board's input, and also, if anything has changed recently, we are taking another look at these.
All right, so we can read these and in the next couple of weeks give you our input if we feel there's any areas to change or additions we would suggest.
Yes, because we won't bring this back until May for action in June.
Excellent. All right, Mr.
I have
Rosenthal.
a quick question. How many policies are there approximately? I don't need the exact number, just
Oh, goodness.
approximate, ballpark.
Ballpark.
I think it was in the 200 and some range when we looked at
Let's
it.
just say this is job security.
Does a lot, because it feels like a lot.
That's an information request. It'll take about 3 weeks to research that on how many.
Mr. Rosenthal, we
Is it
actually have
hundreds,
that.
thousands? I mean,
We
you know.
have that number in the memo